Welcome to Buried Truths, the home of thrilling detective stories, unsolved mysteries, and cases that keep you on the edge of your seat. Here, we uncover hidden secrets, shocking twists, and the dark corners where truth hides. From classic whodunits to modern investigations, every story is crafted to immerse you in suspense and challenge your inner detective. Before we dive into today's mystery, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? We love seeing our Buried Truths family connecting from different countries, cities, and states across the world.
The 7 Murders on Christmas Day. Chapter 1, Crackers and Charades. The frost lay thick across the lawns of Ashgrove Hall that Christmas morning in 1953, turning the vast estate into a glittering winter tableau. The long drive sparkled under a pale December sun, and the ancient elms, bare of leaves, stood like sentinels against the sky. Jessica Fletcher adjusted the fur collar of her coat as she stepped down from the motor car. She paused a moment to take in the scene. "How perfectly lovely," she murmured, her voice touched with admiration and caution in equal measure. Beside her, Lady Dolly Bantry, resplendent in burgundy velvet and a fox fur stole, linked her arm with Jessica's. "Reginald enjoys making an impression," she remarked briskly. "Though in fairness, Hester has outdone herself this year. Look at that holly above the door, so exact, so finely done." Jessica's eyes, trained by years of observation in St. Mary's Mead and beyond, caught the details at once. The wreath and garland were not simply hung but wired carefully, each twist placed with the patience of skilled hands. A festive decoration, yes, but also an arrangement made with unusual precision. The heavy oak door swung open before they could knock. There stood Hester Pomeroy, Sir Reginald's niece, her dark hair styled in fashionable victory rolls, her smile warm but edged with strain. "Lady Bantry, Miss Fletcher, how good of you to come. Do come in out of the cold." The great hall of Ashgrove was ablaze with Christmas spirit. A tall fir tree glittered with glass ornaments and silver tinsel, garlands of ivy dressed the beams, and a roaring fire filled the stone hearth with warmth. Yet even amidst the cheer, Jessica detected a thin veil of tension in the air, an atmosphere of festivity carefully arranged, but not entirely natural. Sir Reginald Pomeroy himself soon emerged. A man of 60, broad-shouldered and iron-haired, he carried himself with the authority of one accustomed to command. His greeting was cordial but carried a certain arrogance, the sort of tone that suggested he expected the world to fall in step behind him. "Miss Fletcher," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Dolly speaks highly of you. I'm told you have a talent for solving puzzles." Jessica offered a polite smile, though she left the comment unanswered. The introductions continued in the drawing room, where the other guests waited. John Brent, a young man with the upright bearing of a former soldier. His manner was open and pleasant, but Jessica noticed how often his eyes flickered toward Sir Reginald, searching for approval that never came. Mrs. Lydia Forrester, middle-aged, handsome rather than pretty, in deep navy attire that hinted at mourning not long past. She lifted her sherry glass with hands that trembled faintly. Theo Grant, lean and nervy, busied himself with fairy lights near the mantel. He moved with fussy precision, the sort of man who prided himself on details. Dr. Peter Lyle, the local physician, warm-voiced and genial, his weathered hands betraying years of country practice. The luncheon was splendid, roast goose crisp and golden, plum pudding rich with brandy, conversation flowing though never entirely free of undercurrents. Jessica quietly observed the subtleties, John Brent choosing his words with care whenever Sir Reginald addressed him, Hester's attempts at brightness shadowed by anxiety, Mrs. Forrester retreating into silence. Then Sir Reginald rose, port glass in hand, his eyes glinting with self-satisfaction. He patted the breast pocket of his jacket. "My friends," he declared, "I have in my possession certain correspondence, letters that will be posted this evening. Their news will prove advantageous to some, and, I dare say, most improving to others." The silence that followed was heavy. John Brent turned pale. Hester's fingers clutched her napkin until her knuckles whitened. Mrs. Forrester stared at her plate as though she dared not look up. Even genial Dr. Lyle shifted uneasily. It was Hester who finally broke the tension. "Uncle, please, let us not cloud Christmas Day with serious matters. I had thought after luncheon we might enjoy some games." Theo Grant brightened at once. "A game? Splendid idea." Hester smiled, though Jessica detected something brittle beneath her composure. "I was thinking," she said slowly, "of murder in the dark." Jessica Fletcher, quietly gathering her impressions, sat back and folded her hands in her lap. She had seen many Christmas gatherings in her life, but seldom one where merriment seemed to carry such sharp edges. Something told her this holiday would not pass without blood in the snow. Chapter 2, 6 Harmless Murders. The drawing room of Ashgrove Hall had been transformed into a stage of anticipation. With luncheon cleared away and coffee served, Hester Pomeroy assumed command of the entertainment. She carried herself with the brisk authority of a hostess who had already decided exactly how events should unfold. "Now then," she announced, producing a deck of well-worn cards from the writing desk. "We shall play Murder in the Dark. Some of you may be unfamiliar with the rules, so let me explain." Jessica Fletcher settled herself comfortably near the fire, her knitting bag resting at her side. She had played such games in her youth, though seldom with such elaborate trimmings. Her keen eyes wandered across the room, two broad sofas facing each other on the Persian carpet, armchairs pulled close to the hearth, and a corridor running off toward the servant stairs, an older, quieter wing of the house. Every detail fixed itself in her mind. Hester continued with calm efficiency. "Each of us will draw a card. Whoever receives the ace of spades becomes the murderer. The king of hearts designates our detective. All other cards are quite innocent." "And then?" Sir Reginald demanded, examining his glass of port with deliberate nonchalance. "The lights are extinguished," Hester replied, her eyes bright with eagerness. "The murderer moves about in the dark and claims a victim by touching them on the shoulder. The victim must fall down, dramatically, of course. Once a cry has been heard, the lights return, and our detective attempts to unmask the culprit." John Brent shifted uneasily. "Seems a bit elaborate for a game." "Oh, but that's the charm," Theo Grant interjected, already fussing with a light switch. "The drama. The suspense. I've even rigged the switches so I can control the corridor lamps as well as the drawing room. Adds atmosphere." Dr. Lyle chuckled, though his eyes carried a trace of concern. "As long as no one actually trips and breaks their neck." "Nonsense," Sir Reginald cut in sharply. "Perfectly safe, provided people use common sense. Though I suppose that is asking a great deal of some." His glance toward John Brent was pointed. Jessica noticed Hester's fingers tighten slightly as she dealt the cards, though her voice remained cheerfully light. "Shall we begin, then? Games are so much more amusing when one doesn't overthink them." The first round commenced. The lights went out, plunging the room into velvety blackness, save for the faint glow of the fireplace. A few nervous giggles, the shuffle of footsteps, and then a theatrical wail. "Oh! I am undone, murdered most foully," cried Mrs. Forrester, collapsing across a sofa with dramatic flair. Her paper crown from the Christmas crackers sat askew on her head, lending comedy to her mock demise. When the lamps returned, John Brent, holder of the King of Hearts, played the role of detective, striding about with mock gravity before accusing Dr. Lyle. The good doctor protested indignantly, only for Theo to reveal the ace of spades with triumphant pride. And so it continued. 6 rounds of murder in the dark. Theo perished in the second with operatic flourishes at the piano bench. John sprawled convincingly across a footstool. Dr. Lyle slumped near the hearth, his fall disturbingly lifelike. Lady Bantry expired with great dignity, though not without a mischievous sparkle in her eyes. Jessica, though outwardly amused, studied the pattern. Each death occurred in the central circle of sofas and chairs. None fell near the back corridor, nor close to the stairway beyond. Whether by coincidence or calculation, she could not yet decide. Even more intriguing was Hester's control of the cards. After each round she gathered and shuffled them herself, her fingers sure and practiced. Jessica's sharp eyes caught a peculiarity. The ace of spades and king of hearts bore minute scratches along their top edges, barely visible, but clear enough for someone accustomed to delicate work. During one interval, while Theo adjusted the fairy lights yet again, Jessica leaned toward Lady Bantry. "It is curious, Dolly," she whispered, "how very orderly this all is." Dolly gave a doubtful glance around the room, where guests giggled and fainted theatrically. "Orderly? My dear Jessica, it looks like chaos to me." But Jessica had observed more than laughter. The holly garlands along the back stair banister showed unusually neat wirework, professional, even. And on the newel post she had noticed something caught in the varnish, a thin black thread, almost invisible in the dim glow. Stranger still, the key to the fuse cupboard, usually locked away, lay carelessly on a side table. Sir Reginald grew more jovial as the game went on, patting his breast pocket as if to reassure himself of his mysterious letters. "Splendid entertainment," he declared after the 6th round. "Though I should like a more active part. It grows dull, merely watching." Hester smiled brilliantly, though Jessica thought it a smile like sunlight on ice, beautiful, but cold. "Oh, uncle, the best is yet to come. One final round, properly dramatic. No lights at all, even in the corridor. Complete darkness for our grand finale." Theo clapped his hands eagerly. "Capital. Nothing like true blackness for atmosphere." Sir Reginald rubbed his hands together. At last, some excitement. As Hester gathered the cards once more, her movements as graceful as a dancer's, Jessica Fletcher felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Something in this final round promised danger beyond the bounds of play. The cards were dealt. Jessica glanced down at a harmless 7 of clubs. Around her, she sensed the sharpened anticipation. "Ready?" Hester's voice rang bright. "Then let the final murder commence." The lamps clicked off, plunging Ashgrove Hall into utter blackness. And Jessica Fletcher, her instincts stirring, sat very still, listening. Chapter 3, The 7th Round. The instant the lamps went out, the room dissolved into absolute darkness. Jessica Fletcher, used to the soft twilight of her cottage, found the total absence of light unnerving. Not even the glow of the fire remained, the hall seemed swallowed by a heavy, suffocating black. She held her knitting bag firmly in her lap and remained motionless. In such silence, the smallest sound became amplified, a floorboard groaning, the whisper of fabric brushing past a chair, a breath drawn too quickly. "Goodness, how thrilling," Lady Bantry's voice floated from nearby, bright but edged with nervousness. Jessica tilted her head, listening. A faint scuff echoed near the window. Then came another sound, different, something dragged faintly against the floorboards in the direction of the back corridor. She stiffened. That was no playful shuffle. Sir Reginald's voice boomed confidently from the darkness. Adds to the fun, eh? Just the sort of thing to stir the blood. His tone carried an odd relish, more genuine than theatrical. Jessica's ear caught purposeful footsteps, heavy, sure strides moving toward the rear of the house. Behind them, a lighter set of steps followed cautiously, as though someone feared stumbling in the unseen maze of furniture. "Careful, all of you," Hester's voice called from the card table. "We mustn't let a game end in real injury." The irony of her remark pressed heavily on Jessica. Something about the silence felt staged, not the relaxed hush of play, but the taut stillness of anticipation. From somewhere near the piano, a burst of laughter startled everyone. Nearly bumped into a coal scuttle. John Brent exclaimed. His voice tried for humor, but Jessica thought she heard strain beneath it. "Yes, very atmospheric." Theo Grant's reply carried from the corridor. He sounded altogether too excited by the effect of his blackout. Jessica focused again on Sir Reginald's tread. Unlike earlier rounds, he had not stayed near the sofas. He was heading for the back staircase. And then, it happened. A sharp cry tore through the dark. It ended almost instantly, cut off as though strangled in the throat. This was no theatrical shriek of mock despair. It was the desperate, brief sound of a man in genuine peril. A sickening thud followed, reverberating against stone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Jessica could hear her own heartbeat, and the collective intake of breath from the others. "That didn't sound right," John Brent said sharply. "Lights." Lady Bantry's voice cracked with sudden fear. "For heaven's sake, turn on the lights." Fumbling noises erupted at the door. Theo's voice came, high and anxious. "The switch isn't working, wait, hold on." Clicks, frantic attempts, then at last a blaze of illumination flooded the room. Everyone blinked, adjusting to the sudden glare. Jessica's eyes swept the space at once. All were present, except Sir Reginald. "Where is he?" Mrs. Forrester whispered, her face pale. Dr. Lyle had already crossed to the back corridor, his instinctive training overriding hesitation. Jessica rose as quickly as her age allowed, following with Lady Bantry close behind. At the foot of the staircase they found him. Sir Reginald Pomeroy lay crumpled on the stone floor, his body twisted at a grotesque angle, blood pooling beneath his head. Dr. Lyle knelt, his hands efficient, but the verdict came swiftly and grimly. "He's gone." A fractured skull. The fall was violent. Hester's voice trembled as she spoke. "But how? Why would he even be on the stairs in the dark?" Jessica's gaze fixed on the banister. The carefully wired holly arrangement was no longer tidy. Several sprigs hung loose, one broken wire dangling, another piece lying on the flagstones. She felt a cold certainty stir in her mind. This was no accident, Jessica said quietly, more to herself than to the others. Moments later, the heavy knock of a motorcar door closing outside signaled the arrival of the police. Within minutes, Inspector Slack strode in, his expression brisk and businesslike. Well. A Christmas tragedy," he muttered after a quick examination. "Gentleman loses his footing in the dark during some ridiculous game. Bound to happen at his age." But Jessica Fletcher, standing beside the disturbed Holly and remembering the peculiar details she had noted earlier, the misplaced fuse key, the scratched cards, the black thread on the newel, was far from convinced. She lifted her eyes to the inspector. "Might I suggest," she said in her calm, deliberate voice, "that this deserves a rather closer look?" Inspector Slack turned, already weary of Jessica's quiet authority. "And what exactly do you think you've noticed, Miss Fletcher?" Jessica's gaze returned to the broken holly wire, glinting under the electric light. "That sometimes, Inspector, games are far more dangerous when someone plays them in earnest." Chapter 4, Black Thread on the Newel. The festive sparkle of Ashgrove Hall had dimmed. With death in the house, every garland and ribbon seemed to mock the room in which the guests now sat in uneasy silence. The fire still burned in the grate, yet its warmth no longer reached anyone. Inspector Slack, brisk and impatient, had gathered everyone together. "We'll keep you here until the matter's been looked into," he said firmly, his notebook in hand. Routine procedure. Jessica Fletcher quietly resumed her knitting, the steady rhythm of her needles masking her watchfulness. To an untrained eye she looked calm, but her pale eyes missed nothing. Hester Pomeroy sat rigidly upright, her hands locked tightly in her lap. John Brent hovered near her, protective, though his face betrayed both shock and something Jessica thought looked like guilty relief. Mrs. Forrester had retreated inward, her earlier theatrics replaced by a pained reserve. Theo Grant fussed endlessly with his spectacles, polishing them over and over. Even genial Dr. Lyle seemed unsettled, mopping his brow despite the winter chill. Lady Bantry slipped into the chair beside Jessica, lowering her voice. "You don't think this was just an accident, do you?" Jessica set her knitting aside. "No, Dolly. The details speak too clearly." Before she could say more, Inspector Slack re-entered from the back corridor. His manner was that of a man who longed for simplicity. "Clear enough what happened," he declared. Sir Reginald went blundering down the back stairs in darkness, missed his footing, and cracked his skull. A tragedy, yes, but not mysterious. "Forgive me, Inspector," Jessica said gently, "but has anyone examined the staircase itself, closely?" Slack frowned. "Stone steps, wooden banister, holly tied round it. I saw nothing out of the ordinary, save for the greenery he knocked loose." "Then may I suggest," Jessica replied, "that we take another look. Sometimes what seems ordinary proves the opposite under better light." Reluctantly, Slack led her and Lady Bantry back toward the scene. Sir Reginald's body had been covered with a tablecloth, a grim dignity restored. Jessica moved with slow care up the steps, magnifying glass in hand, while Dolly followed, handkerchief ready. The holly indeed had been disturbed, sprigs bent out of shape, berries scattered across the flagstones. Yet what caught Jessica's attention was not the obvious disarray, but a subtle detail on the newel post where the banister began its rise. She held her candle closer. "There," she murmured. Between her fingers she drew out several thin strands, black and glossy, almost invisible against the varnish. Silk thread. Very fine. Snapped, not cut cleanly. "Do you see, Inspector?" Slack bent down, his skepticism slipping. "You mean someone stretched a line here?" "Exactly," Jessica replied. "At ankle height. Enough to trip a man walking swiftly in the dark." The silk snapped when he fell, fragments caught in the varnish. They moved further up the stairs, and Jessica paused again, pointing to a faint scuff across one step. "Notice this mark. A thin line, exactly where a thread would have been stretched. Not a scuff from shoes, too straight, too deliberate. Lady Bantry leaned closer, squinting. It does look rather like a line, doesn't it? Someone set a snare, Jessica said quietly. The holly, too, tells a tale. One of the wires has been cut, not pulled, not torn, but clipped cleanly by a sharp tool. Inspector Slack drew in a breath. So you're saying someone planned this? Jessica folded the fragile threads carefully into her handkerchief. Yes. It was no accident. Sir Reginald was tripped deliberately in complete darkness. And whoever set that line did so with precision, knowing exactly how and when he'd take those stairs. At that moment, footsteps sounded behind them. Hester appeared at the corridor doorway, pale but composed. Inspector, how much longer must we stay gathered like this? My uncle's death has been quite overwhelming. Slack turned toward her. Just a while longer, Miss Pomeroy. Miss Fletcher believes there's more here than an accident. Jessica studied Hester's face in the candlelight. Her voice was steady, her posture composed, but her eyes betrayed something harder to hide, a flicker of fear, carefully controlled. Of course, Hester said softly. We must do everything we can to help. Jessica slipped the black silk into her pocket. The pattern of the evening was becoming clearer. Someone in this house had turned a parlor game into a trap, and the trap had sprung with fatal consequence. And the murderer was still among them. Chapter 5, The Fuse with Silver Foil. The drawing room had grown heavy with unease. What had begun as a game of Christmas charades now bore the mark of deliberate malice. Inspector Slack, once so sure of a simple accident, now prowled the room with an expression of suspicion fixed firmly on each guest. Jessica Fletcher, meanwhile, considered not the people but the details. In her experience, truth often hid in the smallest, most overlooked corners. And here, the matter of the lights troubled her greatly. She turned toward Theo Grant, who sat hunched over, polishing his spectacles for the 10th time. Mr. Grant, may I ask, how exactly did you manage the lighting? You mentioned you could control not only this room, but also the corridor and stair lamps? Theo blinked nervously. Yes, yes. I had the electrician put in a secondary switch. Thought it might lend drama to our theatricals. From my place near the door I could black out the drawing room and the stairway together. Jessica nodded slowly. And during that last round, you threw both switches? Indeed. Complete darkness. Quite effective, though rather too effective, it seems. Usually there's a faint glow from the fire or the hall, but this time it was absolute. His voice faltered. And when I tried to restore them, the drawing room lit instantly, but the stair lamps resisted. I had to throw the switch several times before they obeyed. Inspector Slack narrowed his eyes. Which means someone tampered with the wiring. Or the fuses, Jessica murmured. She rose and asked, might we see the fuse cupboard, Inspector? With some reluctance, he agreed. They moved through a side passage to a small alcove near the servants' entrance. The cupboard stood there, brass nameplate gleaming faintly. Curiously, the key lay openly on a nearby shelf. How convenient, Jessica observed softly. A key that ought to have been locked away, sitting where anyone could find it. Slack grunted and opened the cupboard. Inside, neat rows of porcelain fuse holders lined the panel. His torch swept across them, but it was Jessica who pointed sharply. There, the third from the left. The stair circuit, I'd wager. What they found was damning. Instead of the proper fuse, a small twist of silver foil bridged the contacts. Folded with careful precision, it gleamed in the torchlight. Inspector Slack extracted it with his handkerchief. "Chocolate wrapper," he muttered grimly. "Used so the switch would appear to work, but the circuit stayed broken. Deliberate sabotage." Jessica examined the foil closely. The embossing revealed it came from an expensive chocolate, the kind found in a holiday box. A faint smear of cocoa still clung to the edge. "This wasn't prepared days in advance," she said quietly. "It was taken fresh, folded on the spot, and fitted here to ensure darkness at precisely the right time." Back in the drawing room, Jessica's sharp eyes caught a faint glimmer on Hester Pomeroy's right glove. A trace of silver dust, nearly invisible but undeniable to one who knew where to look. "Miss Pomeroy," Slack began, his voice sharper now, "those chocolates you passed round before the final game, where are they now?" "In the box on the side table," she answered smoothly, though Jessica thought her tone too carefully even. "They came from our Christmas crackers. It seemed festive to share them." "Festive indeed," Jessica replied, her voice mild but her mind racing. She recalled the foil wrapper, the misplaced fuse key, the scratched playing cards. None of it felt accidental. Dr. Lyle, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke. "But surely you don't mean, someone planned all this? The idea seems incredible." Jessica looked at him steadily. "Not incredible, Doctor, merely precise. The trip wire, the sabotaged fuse, the marked cards. All designed to work together. Sir Reginald's fall was not a misstep. It was engineered." John Brent's face paled further. "But how could anyone have known he'd take those back stairs? The earlier games all kept us in the drawing room." "A good question," Jessica said approvingly. She moved to the table where the cards still lay. Under her magnifying glass, the ace of spades and king of hearts revealed faint scratches along their top edges, marks so subtle only a practiced hand could feel them during a shuffle. She held the cards up for Slack to see. These were tampered with. The dealer knew exactly where they'd fall. And the dealer, Slack said grimly, was always Miss Pomeroy. The room fell into silence. Jessica set the cards back on the table. The pieces of the puzzle were assembling, yet she knew the picture was not yet complete. Someone here had orchestrated not only a game, but a murder disguised within it. Chapter 6, The Ace with a Scratch. The drawing room had settled into a hush thick enough to smother conversation. Though the fire still burned and the holly still shone, the cheer of Christmas had vanished, replaced by unease that hung over the company like smoke. Inspector Slack stood at the center, notebook in hand, reading faces with his usual blunt suspicion. "It's clear now," he declared. "This wasn't clumsy misfortune. Someone staged Sir Reginald's fall. Which one of you, that's what we've to uncover." Jessica Fletcher, however, chose a quieter space, the adjoining billiard room, where the lamp above the green baize table cast a steady, honest glow. She had brought the playing cards with her, spreading them out carefully, her magnifying glass in hand. Lady Bantry followed, eager for refuge from the oppressive air of the drawing room. "My dear Jessica, this grows frightful," she whispered. "To think one of them could have planned it, on Christmas Day of all times." Jessica adjusted her spectacles and examined the deck. "Frightful, yes. But careful work tells careful tales, Dolly. Look here." She held up the ace of spades and the king of hearts, their edges catching the lamplight. Under magnification, the scratches were unmistakable, minute grooves along the top edges. "Someone marked these," Jessica said. "Not clumsily, but with delicate precision. The sort of work that would escape 7 sets of eyes, yet guide 1 set of fingers during the shuffle. Lady Bantry shivered. So the dealer could decide exactly who drew the murderer and who the detective. Exactly. Jessica's tone was firm. And if you recall, the dealer was always Hester. Through the doorway they could see the rest of the party. Hester Pomeroy sat rigid, hands folded with exaggerated composure, eyes carefully averted from the card table. John Brent lingered close, protective yet pale. Dr. Lyle pretended calm, though he mopped his brow often. Theo Grant twitched and fidgeted, adjusting his spectacles every few minutes. Mrs. Forrester gazed blankly at the window, her face shadowed by grief, or perhaps guilt. Jessica tapped the scratched cards gently on the table. These reveal several things. First, the culprit must have had both patience and practice. Second, they knew how each player behaved during earlier rounds. Sir Reginald, when unassigned, habitually took himself toward the back of the room. By steering him into that role again, the murderer all but guaranteed he'd find the staircase in darkness. Inspector Slack entered then, gruff and restless. Clever observations, Miss Fletcher, but we need names. Who tampered with these blasted cards? Jessica folded her hands. We must examine actions, Inspector. During the final round, John Brent drew the King of Hearts. As detective, he moved toward the front hall, away from danger. Sir Reginald, as ever, strode toward the back corridor. The others clustered near the fire. Which means the trap had been laid specifically for him. Slack scowled. Any one of them could have slipped to the fuse cupboard or meddled with decorations. Jessica smiled faintly. Could they? Consider, folding chocolate foil to bridge a fuse requires precision. Setting a thread at ankle height demands the sure hand of someone skilled in fine craft. And timing, all of it, meant knowledge of the house, of Sir Reginald's habits, and of how to manipulate the game. Lady Bantry leaned closer, her voice hushed. And who fits all that, Jessica? Jessica's eyes returned to the drawing room. One person had the tools, the dexterity, and the motive. One person dealt the cards, cut the wire, and handled the chocolates. But before we leap to conclusions, let's remember, evidence can point both ways. My task is to separate what is convenient from what is true. She gathered the cards back into their box, her mind stitching together threads of silk, wire, and foil into a pattern that grew harder to ignore. The trap had not been clumsy. It had been elegant, deliberate, almost artistic. And only a hand trained in delicate, painstaking work could have tied death so neatly into the game. Chapter 7, Holly Wire and a Snip. By late evening, Ashgrove Hall had grown unnervingly still. The Christmas tree twinkled on in the corner, its ornaments gleaming as if nothing had changed, yet the room itself felt steeped in suspicion. No one spoke above a murmur, and even the clinking of glassware seemed too loud. Inspector Slack stood at the foot of the back staircase, his bulk blocking the way as he bent to study the banister. Miss Fletcher, he called, you said one of these wires looked cut. Care to show me? Jessica joined him, candle in hand. The greenery twined round the banister looked festive at first glance, but closer inspection told another story. She touched a sprig gently, holding it aside so Slack could see. Here, Inspector. Notice how the wire end is perfectly clean, not frayed. Someone used scissors, or something equally sharp. Slack peered closer, then muttered, so the holly was tampered with deliberately. Indeed, Jessica replied. The arrangement itself was precise this morning. Whoever cut this wire did so intentionally, and recently. She continued her examination upward. Near the top of the rail, a stub of copper wire still clung where something had been clipped away. And on a side table nearby, half hidden beneath burnt matches, lay a twisted piece of discarded wire with a strand of fine black silk still clinging to it. Jessica lifted it carefully with her handkerchief. "A crucial mistake," she said softly. "Our murderer disposed of the evidence in haste, but even the smallest scrap tells a story." Slack's eyes sharpened. "Which means someone carried scissors with them." That prompted Lady Bantry, who had been hovering nearby, to suddenly exclaim, "Why, what's this in Miss Pomeroy's reticule?" With little ceremony, she plucked a glinting object from Hester's beaded bag. All eyes turned. It was a pair of delicate embroidery scissors, silver-bladed, the handles decorated with mother-of-pearl. Hester's composure cracked for the first time. "They were my grandmother's," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I used them this morning, cutting ribbon, nothing more." Inspector Slack examined the blades under the lamplight. Tiny traces of copper and silk were lodged between them. "Hard to explain away, Miss Pomeroy," he said grimly. Jessica, observing quietly, spoke at last. "Ribbon may account for some usage, but not this. Black silk thread, copper wire, both cut cleanly. That combination does not occur by chance." Hester's face paled. John Brent stepped forward at once, his voice tight with emotion. "Enough of this. You can't accuse her on scraps of wire and thread. You don't know what Reginald threatened her with." The room fell silent. Hester's lips parted in alarm. "John, please." But John pressed on, his voice bitter. "He meant to destroy us. He promised to block our marriage, to see me ruined by dredging up my military past. He had the influence to do it too. He said he'd post letters tonight that would end my career before it began." Jessica listened carefully, her eyes steady on Hester. Here, at last, was motive spoken aloud. "So Sir Reginald's cruelty was not confined to harsh words," she said gently. "He held power over you both, and intended to use it." Inspector Slack drew himself up. Motive, means, and evidence, all pointing one way. Yet Jessica was not fully satisfied. The puzzle was intricate, each piece connected with deliberate care. And though the scissors in Hester's reticule looked damning, Jessica knew the truth of a crime often lay deeper than appearances. The holly wire had been cut with skill, the trap set with foresight. Whoever did it possessed not only tools, but training. And training leaves its mark more clearly than fear or chance. She glanced once more at the twisted wire in her handkerchief, its end bound with a strand of silk. "A cruel craft indeed," she murmured. "And one we must unravel fully before judgment is passed." Chapter 8, Boot Dust on the Wrong Step. The hush that had settled over Ashgrove Hall felt heavier with each passing hour. The guests huddled in the drawing room like a cast of unwilling actors waiting for their final cue. The Christmas lights glowed faintly, but their cheer had long since drained away. It was Dr. Lisle who broke the silence. He had been kneeling beside Sir Reginald's body for one last examination before the constables removed it. Straightening with a puzzled look, he spoke quietly, "Inspector, there's something strange about his boots. Look here, his right toe is dusted with chalk, but the left is perfectly clean. Odd, considering he fell on stone." Jessica Fletcher was at his side in an instant. She bent carefully over the boot, her sharp eyes noting the chalky residue. "Chalk," she said softly. "Not from these floors." Where in the house might one find it, Doctor? Lady Bantry, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke briskly. The nursery upstairs. The children marked a hopscotch court across the schoolroom floor only last week. Chalk everywhere, messy business. Inspector Slack frowned. But that's 2 floors above. What would chalk from the nursery be doing on Sir Reginald's boot? Jessica did not answer at once. Instead, she mounted the stairs slowly, candle in hand, examining each step with deliberate care. At the uppermost riser, the vertical face beneath the tread, she stopped. There it was, a faint dusting of chalk at ankle height, while the step above and below were spotless. She turned to the inspector. Do you see? Someone marked the exact height for the trip line with chalk. A guide, so the thread could be fixed perfectly across the stair. Slack bent close, his face grim. So our murderer went upstairs, fetched chalk from the nursery, dusted the riser to measure, and then wiped away the rest to hide it. Premeditation, through and through. Jessica nodded. Not only premeditation, precision. They calculated exactly how to place the thread so it would catch Reginald's stride, but break cleanly under his weight, leaving little trace. She thought back to another detail Dr. Lyle had mentioned. And note this, Inspector. Sir Reginald always wore his spectacles when using the stairs, especially in dim light. Yet they were found in his breast pocket. Which means he was rushing, Slack concluded. Startled into moving before he had time to put them on. Precisely, Jessica said. He was lured. Someone made a noise or called softly in the dark, something to draw him quickly toward the back staircase without his usual caution. He stepped straight into the trap. Back in the drawing room, Jessica studied the assembled guests. Hester sat motionless, her face drained of color, hands locked in her lap. John Brent hovered close, his jaw tight with fury and despair. Mrs. Forrester turned away, unwilling to watch further. Theo Grant shifted constantly, adjusting his spectacles as though wishing to disappear. Jessica addressed them quietly. This crime was not improvised. It was crafted with the patience of a seamstress or a milliner. Silk, wire, foil, chalk, tools of delicate work, repurposed for deadly purpose. Only someone with practiced hands and knowledge of Sir Reginald's habits could have done this. A silence followed, taut as wire. Lady Bantry broke it with a whisper. So it was murder, Jessica. No accident at all. Yes, Dolly, Jessica said. A murder as carefully staged as the game that concealed it. And before long, the final piece, the motive, will speak for itself. She folded her handkerchief over the chalk-stained wire she had gathered. The puzzle was nearly complete, and she knew the truth stood very near. Christmas at Ashgrove Hall had begun with laughter and play. It would end with an arrest. Chapter 9, The Letter by the Bell. Inspector Slack had ordered Sir Reginald's pockets searched, and from them emerged a heavy envelope, sealed in wax and addressed to the Evening Post. Its weight seemed almost symbolic, the burden of secrets carried even into death. Slack cracked the seal, but Jessica Fletcher was already watching closely. Careful, Inspector, she murmured. Notice the wax. It's been resealed. Household wax has been pressed over the original impression. Someone's tampered with this already. Inside were 2 documents. The first was cold and formal, a legal withdrawal of consent for Hester Pomeroy's engagement to John Brent. The words were unambiguous. Sir Reginald forbade the marriage on grounds of moral and financial unsuitability. The second paper struck deeper. Addressed to the Home Office, it recounted John Brent's court-martial in Italy, embellishing every misstep, and recommending that he be barred from sensitive employment. The air in the room seemed to constrict as the words were read aloud. John Brent's face turned ashen, though he held himself with dignity. "The charge was minor," he said quietly. "A supply miscount during a retreat. I was reprimanded, reduced in rank. Nothing more. But Sir Reginald, he made it into a death sentence for my future." Hester's composure finally broke. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she whispered, "He promised me only this morning that he had improving news to share. I never dreamed he meant that." Jessica kept her gaze fixed on Hester, observing the trembling lips, the white-knuckled hands. It was not the shock of fresh discovery Jessica saw there, but the weight of confirmation. Hester had already known what those letters contained. "You opened them earlier," Jessica said gently. "You feared what he planned, so you looked. The wax shows it, and your face confirms it." Theo Grant, agitated, leapt in. "But surely reading a letter doesn't make her a murderer. Anyone with access could have done the same." Jessica's voice remained calm, steady. "Access, yes. But opportunity matters." Hester was up before dawn arranging flowers, ensuring the decorations were perfect. She had time alone in this house, when others were absent or occupied. Enough to slip into Sir Reginald's study, read his correspondence, and reseal it without notice. Mrs. Forrester's eyes narrowed with reluctant understanding. "I saw her myself that morning. She said she was trimming holly, but she could easily have been elsewhere." The motive now hung clear and terrible in the air. Sir Reginald had sought to ruin his niece's future and destroy the man she loved. He had weaponized influence, using family authority as a whip. John Brent looked stricken. "Hester, why didn't you tell me? We could have faced him together." "What choice did I have?" she cried, her voice cracking. "He had the power to ruin you, to see you branded unfit for any honest work. One word from him and your life would have been over. He meant to separate us, and I could not let that happen." Jessica spoke softly, compassion in her tone though her words were unyielding. "Love can drive people to bravery, Hester, and sometimes to despair. But what happened on those stairs was not desperation alone. It was planned, step by step, with a skill and patience that cannot be explained away as impulse." Inspector Slack shut the envelope with finality. "So we have it. Motive, clear as day." Jessica folded her knitting into her bag. "Yes, Inspector. But let us not mistake clarity for completion. Motive explains why, but we must still prove who placed the silk, who cut the wire, who marked the cards. That proof lies not in words but in details. And details rarely lie." The guests shifted uneasily, each one aware that the circle was tightening. Somewhere among them sat the hand that had laced wire with silk and set death upon the staircase. Jessica's eyes rested again on Hester Pomeroy, pale as the frost outside. The pattern was almost complete, but one final piece remained to fall into place. Chapter 10, Evensong, 7 That Were Won. The fire in Ashgrove Hall's great hearth had burned low, embers pulsing like the last heartbeat of a once merry day. Around the drawing room, the guests sat as though carved from stone, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. The ornaments glittered on the Christmas tree, their cheer an insult to the heavy silence. Jessica Fletcher set aside her knitting and rose slowly, her calm presence drawing every eye. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this has been one of the most carefully orchestrated murders I have ever encountered. It masqueraded as entertainment, yet every detail, every harmless murder, in the dark, was rehearsal for one that would not be harmless at all. She gestured to the pack of cards resting on the side table. The ace of spades and king of hearts were marked with scratches so faint that only sensitive fingers could detect them. Thus the dealer could guide who became murderer, who detective. By the 7th round, John Brent held the detective's card, sending him to the front hall. Sir Reginald, unassigned, moved to his usual haunt, the back corridor. Predictable, because he had done so in every earlier round. Jessica's gaze turned toward the staircase. There, a tripline of black silk was stretched at ankle height. Chalk marks guided its exact placement. The holly wire secured it, cut with embroidery scissors when the line was no longer needed. And to ensure darkness, the stair lamps were sabotaged with a chocolate wrapper folded neatly into the fuse. Darkness complete, steps measured, rolls arranged, this was no accident. It was design. Inspector Slack nodded heavily, his notebook trembling in his thick fingers. And motive, Miss Fletcher? What drove it? Jessica drew the sealed letters from the table. Sir Reginald's cruelty. He had resolved to forbid his niece's marriage, and worse, to ruin her fiancé's career permanently. Hester Pomeroy discovered this that very morning when she secretly opened and resealed these letters. She realized that by evening her happiness would be destroyed, her future stripped away. Desperation, love, and bitterness wove together, and from them she fashioned this elaborate trap. All eyes swung to Hester. She sat pale and rigid, her hands clenched tightly. John Brent stood at her side, stricken, but silent. Jessica's voice softened, though it remained steady. Hester, you had the skill. The holly wirework bore the unmistakable touch of a milliner's training, neat, precise twists, wire hidden beneath leaves. You had the scissors to cut silk and copper. You dealt every round of cards. You knew your uncle's habits intimately, and you had the will to stop him when he threatened the man you loved. At last, Hester spoke, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for him to die. Only to fall, be hurt enough that he could no longer interfere. I thought it would buy us time. John grasped her arm, anguish on his face. Hester, why didn't you tell me? Because, she whispered, you would have tried to stop me. And he would have destroyed you. Inspector Slack rose with a weary sigh. Hester Pomeroy, I have no choice but to place you under arrest for the murder of Sir Reginald Pomeroy. Anything you say may be given in evidence. The constables stepped forward. Hester's composure cracked completely now, tears streamed freely as she allowed herself to be led away. John Brent followed a pace behind, his dreams collapsing into dust. When the hall had emptied of police and prisoners, Lady Bantry sat heavily beside Jessica. 7 murders in one day, she said faintly. 6 in jest, 1 in truth. Clever, and dreadful. Jessica folded her knitting neatly into her bag. Yes, Dolly. Games can be dangerous when someone turns them into weapons. The truth is always in the details, a scratch on a card, a scrap of foil, a twist of wire. Outside, church bells tolled across the frosty fields, calling the faithful to evensong. Their notes rang with peace, forgiveness, and redemption. But inside Ashgrove Hall, the shadow of murder lingered still, a reminder that even on Christmas Day, human hearts could harbor darkness.